Three. No, did I hit start? Whatever. Three, two, one. We're starting. I hit start. Hi,
Jenna,
Dom. Yeah, exact. We're such a hot
I'm
mess today.
misting.
We
I'm
are
misting.
such a hot mess today.
I don't know. You know what? Because I had to close the windows because it was noisy. So I look
Do you not
very
have
sweaty.
AC? Have you not joined us in like the 20
I
late
have it. No, no,
20th
no.
century?
But I didn't put it on because of we're recording right now. So I don't
Oh,
want
duh. There we go. Okay.
to.
See, I
Yeah. So
can't.
I'm sweating for you
I am
and
having, I
the
had a
audience.
very bad allergy attack this morning. And so I think maybe too many. I might have gone too hard with the antihistamines. And I'll just be honest, I'm high as a kite right now. So let's start the show.
Sounds good.
All right. Hi, I'm Jenna,
And I'm Dom, and we're both award-winning journalists.
who've recently been laid off.
Our industry is experiencing a seismic shift, and it's shed a lot of really good journalists.
So, where does that leave us? Well, we're definitely laid off.
And we're looking for new jobs, looking for what's left of the industry, and what to do next.
And we're looking at all of it. So, if you're a fellow laid off journalist, a working journalist, or someone who admires the craft, we're looking to build community.
Develop new skills, and try to figure out what just happened.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking. Yeah, this time I'm even barely wearing makeup. Like I just couldn't. And you're all
I'm,
hot and
I'm
sweaty and
shining.
I know, I
I'm
know. Wait,
shining with
listen,
beads of
we
sweat.
have a lot to be proud of. We have done a lot.
Hmm.
But it's also just been, well, no, I don't want to say that it's just been us, but most of it has been us. And
Yeah.
we are exhausted and starting to hit the wall. So
Yes. Yes. And we met last week, and we did a really great job
we
meeting up
did. Like
together.
we've done a lot of stuff in planning
Yeah.
and how to move forward with this and how we want to see this
Which we'll
grow, etc.
which we'll discuss next week. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, the time has come for a little break and we are both
Yes.
feeling it. But
Yes.
before we get there, we have headlines for this week.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you want to start off?
I will start. More trouble in public media land. Which could be a whole episode of itself, like trouble in public media land. Oh God. This one is, of course, it's more layoffs, but this time it's coming from KQED, which is one of the nation's largest public media organizations, and they're laying off 19 people as part of a uh, overall 8% reduction in staff. And of course, budgets are always going to be a thing, and so that's going to be something that's going to be have to be dealt with. I don't work in their budget department, so I don't know exactly what it is, but they did report on themselves, which I applaud stations that, are very transparent with this. And
Hmm.
so their president and CEO said that the company oh, excuse me, they're laying off 19 people, but they're eliminating 34 positions because in addition to the 19 people who are being laid off, um, 11 of them accepted early retirement, which is a nice way to handle it, by the way, instead of, you know, cutting
Hmm.
people off in the prime of their career. And
Hmm.
um, then there's also been voluntary departures, et cetera, and some positions that they're not going to be filling. And so altogether, that eliminates 34 positions. And so while that is hard, because again, KQED is another station I am a huge fan of, it's still something, budgets are budgets, man. They're gonna sunset their arts and culture podcast. Um, and some of their on-air and television pledge drives are gonna have some budget reductions, which is also really hard because that's where you raise the money.
Hmm.
So it's sad. It's still sad to hear. I again continue to hope that the ship can right itself, especially for public media. That's just
I
I don't
but
know.
I,
I hold it in a very special place in my heart. So I'm always extra heartbroken when I hear about the layoffs and the budget
yeah.
reductions and the staff cutting happening there.
And as you said, though, while still really sad, and you don't want to see these things happening, you are 100% correct in terms of, I think, in how companies handle these situations, meaning, being transparent about why things are happening. And
Well, this came
also,
from their website. Like
yeah,
they
yeah,
report, yeah, that's
yeah. I
And
love
that's
that.
also super awesome. I think we've seen that for a couple other stations too,
I,
where like
I,
as painful as it is, and it is painful and uncomfortable, they reported on themselves and they were like, listen, this is what's going on.
and I also think giving as much information to people who work within the company as soon as you can, because I think sometimes these companies, things just sort of seem to, some people come out of nowhere and they're surprised by that.
Well, I think it
And
depends on where
that's,
you are
yeah,
on the
yeah,
need to know ladder.
yeah.
Like if you're one of those people who, are deemed
Yeah.
like, oh, well, we don't need to tell them, then to you it's going to come out of nowhere. But,
But you
if
see,
you were watching all along, then you might have seen this coming.
so anyway, that's sad to hear, but yeah, I
We hope
guess
positive things for
yes.
KQED, and I'm sure they will
Yeah.
turn it around.
So my headline actually is from the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. So basically, they conducted a survey of a little over 1,000 people in the Chicago area, and it's basically a survey about the public's interest and reliance on local news. And there were some interesting findings within this survey.
Oh,
So over here, I'm going to read just a few bullet points. So one of them is that 62% of those who were surveyed said that they frequently use a smartphone to consume local news ahead of television, which had 52%, which is, and only 9% of people who responded said they read printed newspapers and magazines. Like, it's so interesting. Just, I mean, I don't think many of us are really surprised about how people consume via smartphone, but I do think it's just a further example of how much it's taken over in terms of the medium. And then also another bullet point was about how only 19% of people either pay or donate for access to local journalism. 51% of people who responded said that no one should pay for local news. Um, Over here, also, there is a feeling of 71% believe local news outlets are doing somewhat well or very well financially, despite the crisis that's been really, hurting the
happening for
news
years,
industry.
yeah.
So that's interesting, just seeing how I think a lot of people just are not receiving the messaging. And then also they asked a question about reasons people who they surveyed consume local news. And it mentioned how 60% of those who consume it say it helps them save and manage money. 52% said it helps them stay healthy. Um, and then when you talked about like civic incentives, they say over here like 15% said it helps them feel connected to their community, 12% said it helps them take action to address issues I care about, and 10% said it helps them stay informed to be a better citizen. So it's just interesting just seeing the connection between the community and local news, and maybe where some, aspects, like I just do wonder what this says about the industry as a whole, the messaging that's getting out to people. Are they really, are the public or the community really seeing it? Or is there a disconnect in how messaging is getting to them?
I was going to say, because I want to go back to that percentage. I can't remember what you said that we're saying they don't think they should have to pay for local news. Like
51%. Yep, 51.
51%, that's crazy. Like if local news is bringing you like, civic wise, and helping you live better and have better health and all these other things, that's not something y- it obviously has value. So
But
that's just bizarre to me that you would
don't
think
you
that's
think,
not
but don't
worth
you
paying
think, Jen,
for.
I mean, a lot of, when so much of what we consume online is seemingly free, that people do tend to now just assume that it should be free, or why would I pay for it if I'm reading it free right now? What's the, like, why should I do that for anyone, is to give, you know what I mean? So I think that's the tough part of a lot of us, it happened
Yeah.
with music, right? It's
Yeah, it
happening
did.
with,
Who knew
it's
Lars Ulrich was right?
it's happened with music, it's happening with movies, it's happening with all mediums. And I think people are just sort of like, there's a sense of everything being online, feeling like, well, it's free, so why should I have to pay for it now? Like, you almost
Yeah.
feel, which is interesting. I've noticed there, even some people on YouTube are, content creators on YouTube who are creating their own streaming services. And some of them get real pushback because people are saying, well, wait a minute, it was free before. Um, and now you want to charge me for it on your because some people want, they're saying it's difficult to make money on YouTube. And why am I make money for YouTube? So I think it's something that it's sort of getting sort of
Well, I think
it's
that's
sort of
also why it's important to talk about the not just the importance of journalism, but the methods and what it takes to create good journalism, because it's not just like a reporter, I don't know, picking up a pad and pen and writing something. There's a lot of people involved in making good work happen. It's not simple and it's not cheap and it's very time consuming. I mean, journalists take a lot of time away from their families, from their personal lives, from their social lives.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know again if it's not you, if all you do is, let's say, if you read the article, because let's keep this real, sometimes you don't. You go online and you see a creator give you a minute synopsis of the article and you start having our conversation online. You know what I mean? And all of a
But it's
sudden,
about the creator's take on the article that, like, if you don't
ex
actually read the
yeah,
article, then are you really, you're getting somebody's take on it.
don't you're 100% correct. I don't know if everybody sees it that way though, because they'll look at it as, well, if they read a few, just like us sometimes when we're giving, that's why we always include links in
Of
our
course, no,
details.
read the article. My God.
Read the articles because obviously we're giving you what stood out to us. You
Hmm.
might see something different. And also, we're doing a very, as we do this podcast, we try to give highlights, but, sometimes there's so many details in there that I would definitely recommend people reading about this survey because I think it makes you a better informed consumer too about how people see things and how they see this industry. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, speaking of all of the work that journalists do to put out good work and what they sacrifice, it is important, even for people working in the industry, as volatile as it is, to still be able to build community and friendships with other people, especially other people working in this field, because it's unique. Like, I,
mhm.
of course, everybody has, or I hope has friends across many different industries, disciplines, etc. But not everybody quite gets why we as journalists work the way that we do, make the sacrifices that we do, are ready to drop everything on a dime the way that we do, or work some of the insane long hours, all of those things. So yeah, we got a chance to catch up and oh, we mentioned before that we were outside. This is the outside part coming up.
Oh wow, yes, somebody
I
let us
just
out.
realized.
Somebody let us out of our
We let
homes.
ourselves out. That's the important
Oh,
part. We let ourselves out.
sure.
Yeah. And so that's a really, really, I think, important part as
Yeah.
all of us working in the field move through this latest, whatever this is right now. But there is another side. And so check out our interview. All professions are about relationships, networking, mentorship, career building, and connections. Now, after all, most people land new jobs based on who they know as much as what they know. So, in an industry as volatile as journalism is right now, those relationships can be more critical than ever. So, what's a journalist to do if you were hired just before or during the pandemic and never got a chance to build those personal relationships in person? You hold events like the Media Mixer. So, Samantha Stokes, our next guest, is a Business Insider reporter covering artificial intelligence startups and the venture capitalists that fund them. And earlier this year, she decided, you know what, I'm just going to throw a party for journalists as a way to connect and build community in an industry that is rife with isolation, deadlines, lots of work, and lots of layoffs. So, Dom and I went to one of the Media Mixers from earlier in May, and here's how it went.
It's 6 p.m., and we're headed down to a little bar and house in the street called the Brooklynier. And yes, while we are here to enjoy a drink or two, we've actually come for the company. And in a few moments, this bar is going to be packed with it. This is a meetup group for all journalists, but its creation was inspired specifically by young journalists hired just before or during the pandemic, and it's called the Media Mixer. Just a quick look around the bar, and it's clear it's something professionals all across the industry are excited for.
For those of you who started your career in the pandemic, why is it important to come out to an event like this?
Oh, this is so needed in the New York City journalism landscape. I was talking to one of my friends recently, and it feels like the only way that you can really get to know people is either by prior connections, like having gone to school with them or working with them, and that's a slow churn for everybody, or conventions, like conferences, and that's not available to everybody, and they only happen a couple times a year. So it's nice to finally have a scene back in New York. This is still very fresh. This is very new. This is the second meeting of this. The first one happened in March. And so it's just so cool seeing the turnout for this, that everybody's still engaged, still thirsty for this, still wants to do it. It's really cool. Yeah, it's just invigorating.
A friend of mine drew me here, but I think it's nice to meet other people, especially at the J school we met. I feel like we connected, but it was during the pandemic or late pandemic. So I think it was still hard to kind of find your own journalism community. And I think events like this kind of allow you to connect in a more friendly or not as formal space as like a conference. Mm-hmm. So I think it's the perfect way to meet people who might be interested in the same topic as you, and people who work in your field, people who you might connect in the future, friends, connections, whatever.
At this event, people are forging new connections, bonding with fellow journalists, and in many cases, talking about the changing nature of the industry and how they can navigate it.
We know the industry is going through a lot. Layoffs are still happening. Companies are still figuring it out. How do you feel in terms of the journalism industry at this point? Do you feel like you're starting out? Do you have a lot of hope for it in terms of, how do you feel about that, where we're at right now?
I guess I would say I feel much better than my colleagues back in Spain. I think it's even worse there. Though not as many places have closed, it's true, but we didn't have as many opportunities, I would say. Right. I think I'm trying to be hopeful. I think it's very challenging. Many places have shut down. Some of my friends had been laid off. So it's definitely challenging, but I feel it's also exciting that some other new opportunities may arise. So just trying to be a little hopeful. Hopefully journalism will always be needed, always checks the power. So what can I say? I'm trying to remain hopeful. And I have a full-time job at the week, so at least I'm grateful for that.
Something I have been thinking about a lot in the last year or so is, how the hell are you going to fund that? We as a collective, right? How do we get young people to buy into this and to say, I need to purchase these kinds of stories? The journalism is very different. The things we're focused on is different. The way we're distributing is different, but also I think the business side has to catch up, because I started covering media in the last year or so. But I find that the business side of things is really lagging. There's a lot of corporate heads in it that have no experience in journalism whatsoever, running these outlets truly into the ground. I think for people my age, when we look at the current state of the industry, our prospects, it's a very individualistic experience. It feels like everybody has some kind of responsibility, some weight to carrying it forward, and yeah, it's going to be different. But that's why, again, part of why this is so fun.
Totally awesome. And we'd like to welcome the woman who organized the Boozy Fun Fest, Samantha Stokes. Samantha, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So first, it's been a really rough winter for the industry. Actually, it's been a rough winter and a rough spring. So how, I guess, are just you feeling going into the summer?
Well, it seems like some of the layoffs that really seem to come one right after the other at the beginning of the year, right around Christmas, January, February, it seems like those have calmed down a little bit. So I guess I'm cautiously optimistic that that's going to continue. But I feel like the economy, more broadly, is not in a great place right now. I feel like journalism is continuing to face a lot of challenges. So I'm hoping that we have kind of a summer that's maybe a little bit more relaxing, just for our industry. But I'm always a little nervous, I feel like.
That is so wild, relaxing journalism, and especially during, such a critical year of a presidential election. But I totally get what you mean, that at least there isn't the added anxiety of am I even going to be able to keep my job?
Yeah, there's the anxiety of covering stuff
Yeah.
is anxiety inducing, but then like your own kind of like workplace is its own separate thing that ebbs and flows. So I'm hoping that while maybe the presidential stuff ramps up and that gets really wild for a lot of people, that there's some more stability, just kind of the day to day. I'm going to a job every day and doing my job. So
Well, I'm wondering, when did, at least for you, did you realize that this was even something that was needed to put together a meetup like this?
yeah, so I had been thinking about doing something like this probably for the better part of last year. As I'm sure a lot of people are these days, if you're maybe working full time, and it also applies to freelancers and maybe folks who've been laid off. But I work remotely a lot. Obviously, I'm like calling in from my house right now. We have an office to go into, a Business Insider. It's not required. But I just kind of felt with people, changing jobs and some of my colleagues no longer being in the newsroom because they work somewhere else or because they've moved and they don't, come in. But I was feeling a little bit lonely. I was kind of feeling a little bit, that my job, which can already be a little bit isolating as a reporter, was feeling like even more isolated when I didn't have those colleagues to kind of debrief after maybe a tough phone call, or to like, oh my gosh, look at this like email that I just got. This is kind of nuts. And I just kind of didn't have any of those interactions. So it was something I kind of started thinking about, last year. And then as I kind of mentioned, these layoffs, when they started really picking up over the holidays and into the new year, it really seemed like it was a good time to just bring everybody together. And, here's a night for just us. We're kind of on the same, we're coming into this kind of knowing, the challenges of our industry. So you can kind of speak the same language as people. So yeah, it kind of began last year, but the layoffs were really a catalyst to, actually making it happen.
So Samantha, have you been surprised by the reaction? Because the event we went to, there were a lot of people there. I don't know the exact number, but there were a lot of people. Have you been surprised by the reaction that you've been getting?
Yeah, I have been really surprised that as many people have kind of caught on to these events that I'm doing, because I just put them on Twitter and then I just kind of let them spread word of mouth. But we've hosted 2 events so far. And the first one that I put together in March, I initially made a reservation at a bar for 30 people. I was really anxious because I actually didn't think that 30 people were going to RSVP. And I think I put my phone down. I was at an event and I picked it up at the end of the night and I had like 100 RSVPs on the first day. And that eventually ballooned into 300 people. So we had to kind of change courses and like find a new venue, and it worked out. But yeah, I would say it's been surprising like how many people actually are, willing to take an evening. I mean, it's fun. At a bar, there you can get a beer and talk to people, but I'm still surprised by how many people have showed up.
Well, I'm wondering how also important is it, because again, there's like, official organizations that host networking events. And even though, yes, there is some networking, but this didn't really feel like it was a networking event. This really just felt like a chance to get to know other people who are either in the industry, recently laid off like we were, or, in between careers, building, etc. Like it had a different feel than that, like, here's my name, here's my business card, this is what I do.
Yeah, I wish I could say that I like was a mastermind that kind of curated that, but that would be taking way too much credit. But yeah, I think I've kind of toyed with the idea of like how structured do I want to make this? Like, do I want to have it where everybody kind of submits a business card and maybe you draw them out of a hat and you have to go like meet that person and talk to them about your jobs. But I think people just kind of want to get together and, they want to chit chat about, here are issues that I'm facing in my workplace. Here's the media gossip that like everybody's kind of reading about, the stories of the week. And, I want to chat about that. So again, it kind of just feels like, it's not quite as much, here I have a job opening and maybe I'm looking for people to fill that job, or I'm an editor looking for freelancers. And it's a lot more of just, we're all people with a shared interest and a shared job in many cases. And so kind of coming together and having that be the jumping off point. And then, I don't know, you walk around and there are conversations that have nothing to do with journalism that people are chatting about. So it seems like, that's the common thread that brings people there. But it's been really nice to see that people have just kind of connected just on a wide range of things and are kind of going from there. It definitely does have more of a friendship vibe, which I think is really fun.
Yeah, I had a number of different conversations with people, talking to people who worked in documentaries. There were people who were talking about, there was, people who worked in breaking news. And, you know, I have to say, I think what was great was people also talking about the industry itself and kind of talking about where they saw it going. And also being curious about different parts of the industry. People were asking me questions like, oh, well, what was that like working there? Or what do you think, um, from your perspective? What do you think people sort of were taking from it? Do you think, and also what do you take from it too, as yourself, like being able to organize this, but also what was your experience throughout this whole process?
Yeah, so in terms of what I hope people are going to take from this, like I think, camaraderie is a really broad topic, but again, I think I love that, people were asking you questions about, different points in your career, and I get the sense that maybe there's some information sharing, which is something that I've noticed at the prior event that I held and at this last one too, where you're in an unstructured space. It's not like a company sponsored happy hour, and not to say that, people are just sitting and spending the entire evening complaining about things, but I do think it can be really powerful to say, hey, I work at so and so publication. We have a new editor. That editor used to be at your publication. Can I hear a little bit about, what it's like to work on that team? Like, what are the good things? What are things that maybe like aren't so great? So I think that, yeah, that sense of camaraderie, but just a sense like on background or it's off the record, but the opportunity to just ask people like, hey, like, here's what I'm experiencing like in my workplace, or like, here's how I'm thinking about the industry. Here are maybe some areas that I'm curious about for potential jobs. Like, what do you think about that? And it seems like there's been, a lot of information sharing about different newsrooms and maybe, ways that newsrooms are operating well or maybe aren't operating well. But I think it's also been really helpful for just people to learn a little bit more about what's out there, like outside of their own career journey, which I think has been cool too.
First of all, I just have to say, I find it so hilarious that in a world of communication, communicating with each other is somehow a radical idea. Because that's always been one of the issues that I've had, is that
Mhm.
it seems as if we don't communicate with each other, even though that's literally what we do. But the other thing that I was really struck with is that, and again, like Dom said, we met people across the board, people who were working in, behind the scenes, people who wanted to get into the industry, people, again, laid off, working, not working, the whole nine. But there was this like this weird, or maybe it's not weird, this sense of optimism from people. Like there wasn't this overwhelming sense of dread and it's all falling apart and this is terrible, blah, blah, blah. And maybe, I don't know, it could have been there were some people who appeared to be, let's say, had a couple of miles on them, but a lot of people seem to be really young. And I'm not sure if it was an age thing or what, but that was really, I guess, inspiring or helpful to take away from, is that people were just like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that sucks right now, but we can still. Do you also get that sense when you've done that?
Yeah, it seemed like, for everybody who is maybe saying, oh, this part of the industry, really sucks right now, there are a lot of layoffs, or I don't love, what's happening, in my newsroom or on my team. It didn't turn it ever like really into a pity party. Like, again, there was that kind of sense of like information sharing. There was like a fair amount of like venting that kind of went on. But yeah, it seemed like there are a lot of people who are like, yes, and I'm also so excited about this new opportunity, or like I'm in conversations with this other newsroom for a potential job that I'm really excited about for these reasons. And then other people can like jump onto it and like, oh, I worked with that editor back when I was at my previous job and they were great. And yeah, maybe some of it is just people seem to be a little bit earlier career. I think that these events like tend to skew probably intern to maybe 10 years in. Maybe people haven't like necessarily phased out of the industry yet if they're going to. But at the same time, it felt like that kind of, I feel like, there could be a world in which it just is like this big, like therapy vent session in a negative way. And people are just kind of dumping on the state of the industry, which frankly is also totally fair. It can be really rough sometimes. But it didn't really take a negative turn. And people seem like really excited about opportunities and, making connections with each other. And I think also just making friends, which I think to your point earlier about maybe less so networking and more so just like making like friends or making contacts in the industry, I think probably helped like keeping things optimistic.
You know, another aspect that I noticed too is the fact that, I mean, we all sort of, take for granted, those of us who've worked in this industry for a long time and maybe worked in next to other people and actually physically worked with other people in offices. And there are a lot of relationships, and you learn a lot actually from people who you work next to. But when you work remotely, while a lot of us really appreciate that ability to work remotely, um, you do miss out on these relationships, these interrelationships, learning from others. Do you think, that was another part of it too, of why these types of things, and also not being sponsored by your workplace, right? Because I think if you're doing something with the office, it takes a different feeling then. But when you do something that's sort of outside of your company, and you do something like this where people get to connect with other people in the industry, you get to learn different aspects. I mean, how important is it, do you think, learning outside of this has been great, being able to work remotely, but at the same point, people, younger journalists are missing out on some aspects of it, being in the newsroom and working with that. So this is a great opportunity to connect to other journalists.
Yeah, I could speak from my own experience here. I graduated from school in 2019, and so I had about 10 months of kind of normal in the newsroom, and I was in a really small newsroom where there were only a couple of other, couple reporters. So even I didn't have kind of like that big, I have 10 people that I can kind of look to on a
Mhm.
team, or even 5 people. I think we were a team of 3. And then the pandemic happened, and it's been remote, and have been on a few different teams at Business Insider, and have been remote in the office kind of occasionally, but it's been pretty virtual. But I think it's good. I mean, I appreciate the flexibility of getting to work remotely, but at the same time, yeah, I do feel like you miss out. We can have a whole long conversation about just the job functions that you miss out on. Getting to sit in the newsroom and like listen to somebody take a phone call, or just being able to ask those questions that you're frankly just not going to bother to ask over email or Slack. But also just from like a personal perspective, I feel like I'm such an outgoing person. I really feed off of other people's energies. So I can be really lonely when I'm just
Mhm.
like, I'm in front of my computer, like by myself all day. And so these events hopefully are kind of an extension of that. If you're somebody who also kind of like feeds off of the energy of other people, and you want to get to know folks that maybe work in a different publication, maybe someday you want to do a job search and you're like, I don't know anybody at these 5 newsrooms that I'm targeting, that I could reach out to and say, hey, can you give me some information about this open role? And I think a lot of younger people maybe don't have, or earlier career people I should say, maybe don't have kind of that web of folks in the industry. And so that's one thing that I've really liked about putting these events on, is you go and you meet people from the Wall Street Journal or the Daily Beast, or folks who are doing a podcast like you guys, which is great. And you can kind of have that, these are not just my direct teammates, but I'm also learning kind of, more broadly about how the industry is doing, what other people are experiencing in their workplaces. And you kind of, put together a bigger picture and advance your kind of career and in that way.
It's so wild because as you were talking about that, I kept thinking, I'm like, that's right. Because there's that whole Twitter feed of overheard in the newsroom, which is
That's not applicable anymore. Yeah, I
yeah,
know.
exactly. And then I realized, oh my God, because I've heard some incredibly funny, incredibly snarky, and like, did he just say that stuff that, again, is one of those little magic moments that exists only if you're in that organism, that living organism of a newsroom. The other thing that I'm wondering is, or maybe not wondering, but just saying, is that so there's this meetup, but then we're also finding out that there seems to be much more of a effort for people to create community for journalists. Again, maybe not just networking, because there's been other events. We actually interviewed someone not that long ago, Phil Rosen, who does his own sort of like is these small intimate dinners called Journalist Club. And I'm sure throughout the rest of the country, there's a lot of other stuff happening. Um, I guess, as we all move forward through whatever this weird space is that the business side of journalism is going through, there just seems to be like a commitment on the part of some people to sort of figure something out, to figure like a lot of people just seem really, really dedicated to like figuring something out because everyone that we spoke to at the mixer was felt very, very committed to the idea of the work that journalists do.
I think that's great. I also, it was so great to be in a room with people, and I probably, in my kind of newsroom experience, it's kind of a given, and those are your direct colleagues. But I think the last time that I really was kind of in a room with people who all felt very similarly about, the future of journalism and some of the optimism that we've talked about, throughout this conversation, despite some of the challenges, has probably been in grad school where you're kind of around other people who also want to do this full time. So yeah, I don't know. I think there's something to it when it comes to I'm, taking this, part of my professional and personal development into my own hands. I am not relying just on my workplace and not relying just on kind of my newsroom and my direct team to build a community. Like I'm going and I'm seeking out, interesting people that maybe I click with on a personal level in some other ways, but they also kind of have that same feeling as I do about how important journalism is, how important it is just, in society, but also like for me personally for a career. So, because if I look at my other kind of like pockets of friend groups that I have, a lot of them aren't journalists and they don't necessarily get it. Maybe they don't care at all, or, they're maybe a little bit media literate and they kind of tune into some of the big, news stories about the media, but they just don't quite understand. But I don't know. I think I can just speak to me personally, but I love the idea of kind of building a community and like a broader network of people who are also journalists who also think that this work is really, really important. For me, it seems like it's going to help me, make this career a lot more sustainable when I have way more people in my corner who understand what I'm going through and vice versa. I kind of get what they're dealing with maybe on a day-to-day basis.
So, Sam, a question we ask everybody is, what drew you to journalism? And like, what was it that drew you to the profession?
Yeah, I always kind of knew I wanted to be a writer. Like growing up, I, was writing all the short stories, like reading very, very ravenously. I think I was in sixth grade. I was Time for Kids had like a little kid reporter role that you could audition for, and then you get to write stories. So I was like a Time magazine kid reporter when I was in middle school.
I'm
And I
already
grew up in
jealous.
I got a polo and I got to interview the Blue Man Group, which is a very fun, yeah. So
That's
that was kind
great.
of my fun, like that's like a fun icebreaker. Is when I was in sixth grade, I did get to interview the Blue Man Group, and it did get to go in the Time for Kids magazine, which is fun. But that experience was, I was really awesome, and I kind of developed, I love to write, I love to read, but bringing in reporting and bringing in journalism, like it's kind of takes that to the next level for me. So you get to spend all day just talking to really interesting people, reading interesting things, whether it's documents, whether it's things other reporters have written, and you get to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit for your readers. So that was kind of the catalyst of it. And then I had some fun little internships at some small town newspapers when I was growing up. I went to school for undergrad for journalism, went to grad school for journalism, and have been here ever since.
Cool, cool. Well,
That's
listen,
great.
we're super glad that you decided to build your career here and also that you decided just, you know what, let's get together. Let's get some people together. Yeah, because there's just such a great need. So Samantha, thank you. We had a great time at the Media Mixer. Oh, by the way, if you want to promote it and people are hearing this, preferably in the New York City market, but if they hear about this and they're just like, I'm kind of curious, what do you recommend they do?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to connect is going to be, we have an Instagram page, so it's just at Media Mixers. We have a link to a newsletter as well. If Instagram isn't your thing and you just want to get, I don't spam people with emails. I'm not trying to have like a famous email newsletter, but if you want just like an email update whenever we throw events, like they get posted to Instagram, they get posted to the email newsletter, and then I put out on my personal channels as well, which is at Stokes Samantha J. So any and all of those, you'll kind of get
We're putting
a
all
sense
that
of when
stuff in
things
the
are
show
going on.
notes. All of the stuff
Okay,
is going
great.
in the show notes. So yeah. All right. Well, like I said, Samantha, thank you so much. We had a blast, and I really recommend that for any other journalists, again, in the New York City market, definitely check it out. If there isn't something like this in your market, it's so worth doing. To be able to connect with people and not have it be like a networky thing is cool.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. If you're
Thanks.
outside of New York and you want help or advice on getting it started, I would be like very happy to help you as well. So definitely just reach out.
Cool. All right. Well, that's it for us. Samantha, awesome.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. Well, we've got some spotlights. Dom, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I'm starting off with actually the headline here was from News 12 of the Bronx. Their news outlet reported how the Bronx will be down to just one movie theater for the entire borough.
What?
Because
One movie theater in the entire borough of the Bronx.
Yep. And
Okay.
so the the Concourse Plaza Multiplex Cinema closed its door this week. Actually, last night, we're recording on Wednesday, but yeah, recorded the close this week. The announcement of the closure was made in April. And so what was interesting here was the last two showings were the 9:30 p.m. for the Garfield movie and Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, which, so number one, you're right. It's shocking that it's just one movie theater for the entire borough, but it also kind of is an example of where the industry is at in terms of the movie industry.
Oh,
Obviously it's
yeah.
so many, but
They're down
and
bad. They might be worse than journalism, which
yeah.
is saying something.
But it really, it's all connected. You know what I mean? It really is. And so it leads me into a podcast I listen to on the regular, which is called the Big Picture Podcast. It's a movie podcast that's hosted by Sean Fennessy and Amanda Dobbins. It's a podcast by The Ringer. They analyze movie news and they analyze movies. And it's so interesting to me because like I see the passion that people have who follow the podcast. And I listen to a number of movie podcasts, and there's so much passion that people have for movies. And the reason why I find it interesting is that it seems like while there's a height of interest in talking about movies, what's diminished is people going to the actual movie theaters. And they talked about this past weekend, the Memorial Day weekend box office gross. So the two movies, the new Garfield movie and Furiosa, grossed combined of 62 million domestically over 4 days, which is the weakest Memorial Day weekend box office in nearly 30 years, which is really shocking. It's interesting because I don't even know if it's shocking anymore. It's been this year, the movie box office is off, they say around 22%, 23%, something like that. And
Yeah.
people are wondering, why are people not going to the movies anymore? Why they're not actually going to the theaters? And and you have some movies that sort of hit it out of the park, like Dune Part 2 did really well, grossed over 700 million this year, but you don't have the same vibe you had last year with the Barbie movie and Oppenheimer, which of course dominated the entire summer last year. And I think it just brings up this really interesting discussion about what's going on. And in the podcast, they kind of get into this, like, what are some of the reasons? They were talking about one reason that, we're in the situation we're in is, at least for this year, the strikes from last year. You had the writers
Yeah,
and
I
actors
was going to
strike.
say yeah, I was literally going to reference that.
Also, the issue of the urgency of people going. Sean brings up the urgency of people going to the movie theaters. Like, people don't feel as like they have to go because movies turn around so quickly. The Fall Guy was out, and which that movie with Ryan Reynolds and Emily Blunt, and it didn't do great at the box office, so therefore it kind of fell off a little bit, and people weren't really going. So guess what? In a matter of like 3 weeks, it's out on video on demand. So people don't feel the urgency of having to go. He also talked about people exhausted with franchises. Streaming, of course, has a big impact. And then going to the movie theaters themselves, it's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just buying the ticket, it's also, the concessions, it's the
Mm-hmm.
parking. I forget, listen, I go, it's different when if you have a family of three or four, it changes things, or people go with groups. And then, I think, and also generationally, I think some people, there's a difference of why people feel like they have to actually go to a movie theater. I mean, do you like I go to my Alamo. I love my Alamo. I have one of their passes, so I go quite often. I mean, I'm curious for you, Jenna. You don't go to the movie theaters. I see
Well,
your
not
face,
really. I mean, I don't
right?
really like, and it's a combination of a lot of things. I mean, one is that, yeah, it's going to the movie theater is a really expensive thing. And two, if I'm going to be plopping down that much cash, like I need something more than just a franchise. Like don't get me wrong, I love the idea of superhero movies, but I'm not a superhero person, so that's not really going to speak to me. To be perfectly honest, I'm much more engaged by a well-told story. Hence my profession. And but those aren't necessarily the movies that are going to pull in big box office numbers, even though
Hmm.
they can be incredibly moving, and like those are the type of movies that I tend to like, but they're not necessarily going to make the huge, box office, Memorial Day debuts. So it seems as if, and in so many different industries, everything keeps getting, the focus gets to be like, I'm just going to do what's going to make me money, full stop. And if it's not going to make me money, I have no interest in doing it. Well, okay, fine. But if you're not going to tell some of these other worthwhile, genuinely interesting stories, I don't, I'm not necessarily drawn to big explosions. Like some people are, and that's fine. But it's not my thing. Like basically, there aren't movies that are speaking to me in a way that it's just like, yeah, I want to go to the movie theater. A lot of it's like, nah, I don't really care.
But the other part of it too, though, is I think, a lot of smaller films do not, of course, get the same type of audience that the
They
larger
also
film,
don't
the
get the same
tentpoles.
push. Yeah.
They they don't. And I don't know what I listen, I'm in New York, and I understand that this happens too. It's like people, a larger city, you have a lot more options, like I see films like I saw the TV Glow. I've seen the
Hmm.
smaller films, Love Lies Bleeding, and they're not mainstream films, but then again, they make $10 million because people don't hear about them, or if they do, they just feel like, well, I'll just wait. Why do I have to go see it in a movie theater? If it's smaller, then I might as well just wait till it goes online and I'll
Well,
watch
that
it when
is
it's
also
streaming.
something to consider. I mean, again, it's like to make an evening of going out to the movies, like,
Yeah,
dinner, you go to the theater, you get your tickets, you get your popcorn, your candy, whatever you enjoy, and maybe afterwards you have a drink and you talk about it. Yeah, all that stuff is incredibly expensive, regardless of what area you're in. So for some people, I could see how, like, you know what, we can just wait and we can stream
it's
it at
reality.
home and do all those, cook at home. I mean, a lot of things shifted as a result of the pandemic, and
Yep.
a lot of people are looking at the way that they live their lives in very different ways. um and yeah, you got to give people a reason other than just, I'm Hollywood, come see me, to get butts in
But
seats.
but where you had, I think, a lot of people investing money in the early stages of the pandemic, where you saw a number of platforms, like whether it be Netflix, and even more so, and you had a Peacock and Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, all these different platforms popping up and really offering so much content. The thing is, now they're pulling back because they can't maintain that. And so at some point, I get it. People feel like, it all kind of, I don't know, it's
Well,
that
there's a
whole
lot
saying,
of
which
things
came
like at
first,
play. Yeah. Like, I mean, there's
which,
also less production happening. There's, from what I understand, it's pretty much ground to a halt.
yeah,
So there's just stuff that had been sitting in the can that now is getting released. And, depending on, I mean, I go back to, I've heard this from my grandparents for my whole life when they were with us. You get what you pay for. And if you're cutting corners and not paying, for example, writers
yeah,
for actual good content, then you're not, or you're not willing to hire good writers, then you're not going to get good content.
yeah, that's true. But it also falls into, it's just there's so much. It's like it also that people, like we were talking early in the show about people not wanting to feeling they don't need to pay for local journalism.
Well,
It
yeah.
also falls for this too. It's not everything it happened in the music industry, and I think it's happening right now with the film industry, is this tendency of we see a lot of content for free. People see people that they like on social media making content that they enjoy, and it's free seemingly, but I don't know how that, I think it's sort of hitting the movie industry as people trying to
Well,
figure
no, it
this
is.
out.
And I will say the social media aspect. I mean, I've had evenings where instead of watching something on TV, I've just been scrolling through various
Yeah,
different
yeah,
video based
yeah,
platforms, TikTok
yeah,
or Reels or whatever, and been just as entertained.
yeah.
Um,
So,
I mean, I think this is also maybe an economic story
yeah.
because keep in mind, a lot of like, especially when I'm on the video platforms and people are talking about why they're not doing stuff, it's economics. There's a huge wealth disparity that we're working with right now.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, aren't even keeping up with what should be um, a livable wage or an ability to live comfortably in
Mm-hmm.
whatever part of the country that they're in. So it even de-incentivizes, is that the word? De
Desensitize, whatever.
whatever it is,
De-incentivizes. Yeah.
de-incentivizes going out into the movies even more.
Mm-hmm.
As it
Mm-hmm.
is, if I'm already paying for a streaming service and this movie that's gonna
Yeah.
like, to go out with my family is gonna cost me, I don't know, maybe $150 or something for a
Yep.
fun night out. I can spend a fraction of that and just be patient and wait for it to come on the streaming service. I'm already like, there's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah. So how about your pick, Jenna? What do you have for your pick?
Oh my God. Okay. Well, I went for an article from the Atlanta Civic Circle. And so that's another independent news outlet. And one of the things that I thought was really cool is they have this thing called the Cost of Living Project, which is an innovative look at the price we pay to live in the Atlanta metro area. And I think that that would apply to just about any metro area. But from what I understand, Atlanta is crazy expensive. And I'm saying that as someone who lives 90 miles outside of New York City. But the conversation is just about more than escalating home and rental costs. It's about exploring the cost of living through food, wages, transportation, childcare, education, and healthcare, in addition to housing. And I think that's a really unique and interesting way to address what it costs to live in an area by, again, an independent news outlet. So the article that I was reading is called From the Ground Up, and it's by J.P. Irie, a Cole fellow. Anyway, so the point is Atlanta is losing its affordable housing. It's got this missing middle, as they put it, basically the missing affordable housing for middle class people. So the mayor has promised to build or preserve 20,000 affordable housing units by 2030, which is a pretty admirable number. There's different approaches that are being used. One is called inclusionary zoning, which I had never heard before, but basically it draws up zones where new apartment buildings can be set aside with some affordable units in them. But, because there's always a but, inclusionary zoning might not necessarily be the silver bullet, because it basically works best in providing affordable to moderate income housing units. Basically, those are people who are making about at least 80% of the area median income, or AMI, which gets referred to several times in this piece. And you still have people in, again, the Atlanta City area, as I was mentioning, income disparities that are making like 20% or 40% of the area median income. And so they're not even going to be able to touch this theoretically affordable housing. And the other thing is that it only lasts for 20 years. So say you get into a unit and, you want to make it your home, especially if you have children. By the time they get ready to go to college, the landlord has every right to then flip that unit and make it market rate. And, paying for college is something else that isn't getting any
Mm-hmm.
cheaper. So how does that help or hurt families in the Atlanta metro area? And something else that they're considering is to take public land and transform that into apartments. Now, I'm not quite sure how that works, because when I think of public land, I think of like public parks. And I'm like, listen, I understand we need housing, but we also need open green spaces like that are open to everybody. So I'm not exactly sure how that part works, but the theory is that if they use public land to build more apartments, then most of the units would be market rate, and that would earn enough revenue to then subsidize at least a fifth of the units in a given apartment building to be subsidized. So again, you want to make sure that people are able to access affordable housing. That's obviously critical, but it's just interesting, I think, to me, to see how another community is addressing this. I think I've talked about it, obviously, in the New York area. It's crazy,
Mhm.
but it's bad everywhere.
Oh, it's bad everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
I even have a friend out of New York State who talked about not being able to afford where they're living and the need to move. And because they realize the rent is, of course, keeps going up and up, and it's sort of like, well, I, I'm I'm paying just as much if I were to try and buy something, but then the difficulty in buying something then becomes, you know, being approved for the mortgage and
Yep.
and then all the other costs that go along with it's it's why it's like I know in New York City that's the tough part too of people who work in the city. How do you I don't, how do you work how do you it's a city you work in but you can't live in. And
Well,
that
that's
becomes
becoming the
such a
case for a lot of cities across the
it's
country.
who lives there then, and there are places that are willing to keep their residents empty or businesses. I've seen, lots of businesses where you'll see stores that have been shuttered for years, and they're willing to just forego that rent and there because the rent is so high. Um, it's a really I'm glad to see that somebody's trying something. I'm curious to see how that works out. So
Well, I
really
feel like a
interesting.
lot of cities are trying something, and I'll
Yeah,
keep my eye out for various
yeah,
different publications around the country and how their communities are attempting to address affordable housing, because it's a crisis.
that's a crisis.
Well, on that note,
The movie industry is in a shambles. The news industry is slowly just going to disappear, and nobody has any place to live. All right, have a great weekend, everyone.
that could
It's going
actually
to be
be
all right.
like, perhaps, as
It's
we
going to be all
grow with
right.
other ideas, we could perhaps do another project where we just talk to elected officials and just, do you think this is sustainable? And that's just the show.
I'm telling you, I don't know.
Do you seriously, honestly look me in through the Zoom camera? Do you think
Everyone's
this
like,
is sustainable?
they're probably maybe to the end of this interview, and that's about it. And then the rest of it's off the table. I don't know.
It's just an
Oh,
idea.
well,
Well, we've come to the end of another week, and next week is our 20th episode. I know, big claps
yay.
for us, man. We did 20. Um, Hopefully I won't have the need to be as Benadryl high as a kite as I am today. But no, we're gonna do another big check-in. I hope you guys have been enjoying the conversations we've been having. I know we've been enjoying having them, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Domenic Camia. Music provided by Jay Cowett, research by Lori Ruthenbucker. Reach out to us anytime at laidofandlookingpod@gmail.com. New episodes drop every Friday at noon.